I want to teach you how to turn a free reptile tank into a houseplant friendly terrarium. So I found this free reptile tank on Facebook Marketplace, and after watching a video by Serpa Design on Facebook, I knew it would be a perfect project to make a little vivarium slash terrarium for my houseplants. So I want to show you guys how I did that, and I'll break down how you can do it too. So here I'm just cleaning up the vivarium that I got on Facebook Marketplace. I cannot believe that they had it listed for free. It's in such great shape and was honestly pretty clean. So I actually just vacuumed it out and then took some rubbing alcohol to wipe the rest of it down. This is important because you want to make sure that the spray foam insulation is going to be able to stick to the sides, and because I don't want any viruses, bacteria, or any other contaminants that might interfere with the plants. So I just gave this a good wipe down, and this is what we ended up with. You can see this top part has a screen for ventilation, and it's just in perfect shape. So our next step is going to be to grab a couple pieces of wood that we can use to kind of create a textured background. So here is all the wood that I might be using. It is not easy to move wood around here without having a lot of friends. I don't know if you can see all of them underfoot following, chewing on the branches as I move them. So let's see if we can get through. Once we get all the wood picked up, and this can be any wood that you find around, we're just going to play around with placing it inside of the vivarium and find whatever arrangement looks best. Be creative here and have fun with it. Also, I kept this part in because I learned a very valuable lesson, which is if you have one of these tanks, do not open the door while it's laying on the back. The door will completely fly off. You will set the materials somewhere and lose them, and now the door will never be functional again. So please learn from my mistakes and don't do what I just did. Okay, back to the build. So the next step is to take the wood that you've chosen and then grab a few planter's pots and just kind of start setting them up however you think you'll want the plants to be inside of the vivarium. Once we have that set up, then we're going to grab our spray foam insulation. I use something called Great Stuff spray foam, and this is going to be what we use to create the texture of the backdrop. Honestly, this part is the most fun. Just read the instructions, get set up, and then make sure that you have everything vacuumed out so that you're getting as clean of application as possible. And then just go for it. You know, you can apply it along the back. I kind of wish that I left a little bit more clearance at the top so that it wouldn't go through the mesh, but just kind of create whatever texture or shape that you would like at this point. I ended up using about a can and a half, so I definitely do recommend getting 2 cans. You can see I waited a little bit to add the planters into the vivarium, and then I just used the second can to make sure that they were covered up. Don't worry too much about getting this all over the branch or stick that you put in, but you do want to be a little careful. It's a little bit difficult to scrape off towards the end. But just make sure you get good coverage and create whatever kind of landscape you'd like. I let that set overnight, and honestly, it was so hard to wait. I would love making progress on this project, but once it's dry, then you just come in with whatever tools you have. I used just a box cutter to kind of cut off the foamy looking structure. We're going to be going over this with silicone at the very end, and so you want to just take out whatever doesn't look like the background that you would like. Don't worry about this too much. We are going to be covering this in a potting medium as well, so I feel like I almost spent too much time getting it perfect, but you do want to carve out whatever texture you would like to have in the background, including the features and landscaping that you'd like to see in this terrarium. As an example for mine, I knew that I was going to be doing mine with houseplants, so I wanted to have one larger pot there at the bottom right, and then for the other ones, I knew I wanted to do some kind of vining plant or something that would hang with like a longer foliage. So that's why I set mine up the way I did. So like I said, feel free to use whatever tools you have available here. If you have a box cutter, scissors, a paint scraper, whatever works for you to remove some of this foam. And I also highly recommend that you actually scrape any excess foam off of the sides of the glass at this point and off of the bottom. It is a lot easier now than once we start to apply the silicone or the paint or whatever other ingredients we're going to add. So you can see me doing that here. Just try to remove anything that you really don't want to have around. And here's a look at where we are so far. So you can see that I've added those planters pots, I've scraped away a lot of that foam, and we have some decent shaping to work with and start to put some silicone on. So this is going to sound dramatic, but I was in no way prepared for the absolute disaster that this was about to become. So I take my brown silicone, and you can see I have a canister of black paint ready as well. And in the video that I learned all this from, Serpa's Designs, which I mentioned earlier, he made it look so easy to apply this silicone, and it absolutely was not. It was truly terrible, and I got silicone in places that silicone should never be. It is now all over my house. I had to open the garage door, as you just saw, to help with the smell. It did not spread at all, and so I completely just like let go of the paintbrush and ended up using my hands to spread it around. So as you can see, it clearly got literally everywhere, all over the glass, and basically everywhere except for where it was supposed to be. It did not fill the foam nearly as well as I thought. So I actually don't know a better way of doing this at this point in time, but I will say make sure that you are emotionally prepared for the silicone-ridden disaster that this part of the process is. I think if I had known what I was getting myself into, I would not have been as upset and panicked as I ended up being. I then took the paint and then just kind of added some low lights over the silicone to cover areas of the foam that I was not able to literally push silicone into, and that actually helped quite a bit. So I do recommend having some paint, although to be honest, I don't think it's entirely necessary because we are going to be covering all of this with the potting medium as well. So that is the stage of the process. Okay, so the next step, I actually pre-mixed a little bit of cocoa husk, cocoa coir, and orchid bark into this mixture that we're going to be using to create texture and an actual kind of substrate for the background. Now, this will naturally adhere to the silicone that we have already placed, so you can just mix this up and then just apply a thick layer on top of the silicone before the silicone sets. And this is how we're looking at this stage of the process. So you can see it's all just kind of laid on there. The silicone hasn't set yet, so it's all loose. And you just want to leave this for several hours. I think I left mine possibly even overnight. So, of course, the most fun part and the part that took me the longest by far was picking out the plants that I wanted to have in here. Once I chose a few cuttings and a couple mature plants, I just set about putting the rest of that substrate mix into the planter sections that I had created and then placing them in there. I was a little indecisive about what plants I wanted to use, so I moved them around quite a bit. I ended up going with a philodendron cream splash up in that upper left-hand corner. In the upper right, it's a Rhaphidophora high, a couple of those. And down in the lower section, I ended up doing this variegated syngonium, and I wanted to leave it in the terracotta pot. It's been doing so well in there, and I wanted to have enough drainage that I actually just set it inside of the larger planter's pot, and then use that substrate to kind of fill in around it, and the paintbrush to remove any chunks that looked unnatural or any parts of the substrate that had stuck to the wall. So that kind of allowed me to be a little bit more flexible with how that went in. This is a little reverted domesticum, philodendron domesticum, and again, I wanted it to be in its own growing pot. I actually moved it straight from water into this little plastic pot that I just cut down to size and then filled in the substrate around it on the bottom. Again, this is just to prevent too much water from being held around the root structure. I thought that might work out better for this plant in the long run, and also to make it a little bit more variable if I did want to remove it or replace it with a different plant. I know that domesticum will outgrow this pretty quickly, and so I wanted to be able to take it out easily here soon. I played around with having this little peperomia in there as well. I didn't end up liking that look though. And then again, they're not like a super humidity loving plant. And so I ended up just taking the opportunity to get that one out of the water propagation and pot it up and run it into my house because frankly, I'm lazy and that won't happen unless I have a reason like this to do that. So that one ended up going back inside. But I just kind of messed around with the layout, and if you guys decide to do this, just play around with it. You know, I definitely recommend taking the time to set it all up before you get them planted in there. You can see that I kind of just experimented with having different pots and different positioning before I did end up leaving the domesticum in that position and filling the rest of the substrate in around it. One thing that I really liked about how I did mine was having the two sticks that kind of cross. I don't think I included it in the video, but I did add a second branch right there going up towards the left. Once the foam was about half set, I included that one as well. So that created a really nice little V shape in between the two where I can put a plant that can root down a little bit in a very natural way. I ended up putting an Terrarium right there that I'm hoping will root up. It's a pretty small space, but it's a great place for something that hangs down or has long foliage. So the last thing to do is just put the door on, and then I ended up using some sheet moss just to increase the humidity and to retain moisture a little bit more, and because I liked the look of it. So you can see me just getting that wet and then placing it around the container here. And here is essentially the finished product. It looks a lot better in person, I'll be honest, but all that was left to do was scrape down the glass with anything that was stuck on the sides and just kind of have a good time looking at it all the time. So that's it. And I've included this video to remind you guys why it's so important that you don't break off the door, or that if you do, you don't set the hardware down on the assumption that you will eventually find it again. Because I can't even tell you how long trying to fix this and trying to find anything that would help me make it work. So please send help if you know how to fix the door on reptile terrariums, because as of right now it is still broken and I do not know what to do about that. So thank you so much for watching. This is the finished terrarium as of today. I hope you guys love it and I hope you make your own.